Okay, we're going to get started. Hello, greetings, good evening. Hope everybody's doing well. My name is Hamid. I'm with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. And welcome to our Tuesday evening webinar. Today is our webinar part 26, this Power Not Paranoia webinar series that we started in lieu of our in-person every Tuesday meeting at our location in Skid Row. And since COVID hit us all, this was in lieu of that. Just wanted to make sure that we stay connected, wanted to make sure that we continue building power together, wanted to make sure that we continue decolonizing all this knowledge out there, sharing knowledge. And a lot has happened since then. Just COVID, the uprisings, and I'm reminded that while there's a big news about the two sheriff's deputies being shot on Saturday evening, since the murder of George Floyd back in late May, just the LA sheriffs over the last, June, July, August, in the last three and a half months have murdered 6 people. The LAPD has murdered a couple more people. The Pasadena Police Department, Long Beach Police Department. So now as we are talking about, violence, and we're talking about state violence, the mass murder of our communities continue at the hands of law enforcement. Before we get started, a couple logistical things. You all joined in, and you noticed that your mics were muted, and there's a reason for that. That we have had our small share of Zoom bombing, where stuff was thrown out there on the screen, so we were able to manage it right away. And also, you noticed in chat that the chat goes to host only, host or the co-host. And that was the reason too that we got also some pretty vulgar messages through chat. So in order to preserve the integrity of the space, and in order to honor everybody's participation, not to police anything or anybody, but just to make sure that we preserve the integrity and honor this place. But feel free to share your comments, your questions, as we continue with our conversation. Today is a really critical conversation, very timely conversation. So if you have any questions or comments, type them in Zoom. There's also raising your hand feature in there too, or just on the screen as well. But if somebody starts using the phone, and if you don't have access to the rest of the features, feel free to text us. You can text us at 562-230-4578, 562-230-4578. So with that, we're gonna get started. So today's conversation is going to be about fusion centers, intelligence gatherings, and all the information sharing that is happening. Fusion Centers, just a quick snapshot, and we've invited a guest with us today, Brendan McQuaid, who is an organizer, is also a scholar, also a teacher. From our vantage point, Brendan is a comrade brother, because he's not purely an academic, so he's been on the street and he's been organizing, so he brings that. The street experience, and also the research and scholarship as well to the table, who's done a lot of deep dive and studying fusion centers as well. But before we go there, I just want to share something quickly as to what was going on. So as far as the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition's history is concerned, we've had our share of protesting and going to the fusion centers in LA. Our first action was in December of 2012, and then the second action we had was a coordinated effort nationwide in April of 2014. So this is just a couple photographs of getting ready for the action at the Fusion Center, going out there, and then people marching. It was a pretty large crowd. We circled. So Fusion Centers, for folks who don't know, is literally a spy center. It's a warehouse of information collection, gathering, information storing, and information sharing. That's where a lot of the information moves within the system, and they play a very critical role. They were developed on the heels of the 9/11 Commission report, Fusion centers had been in existence before 9/11, but sort of a different manifestation of that, where centralized information was being centralized. But since then, since 9/11, fusion centers have played a very crucial central role in information sharing. So these are just some photos of us going there, so to the LA Fusion Center, which is in Norwalk. And here they had put it in a lockdown where folks were, so this is where people were banging on the doors of the building, and it was like, the natives are restless. We're there. We're gonna break through. And this was also from the other side. This was an interesting photo as well, that somebody took this picture, and just kind of this whole glare, and a bunch of our comrades and speaking out, a bunch of folks. It turned into a whole educational moment as well. It turned into a whole, exposing moment, just an event that everybody came together, the community came out, community came together, and then basically, just expose the Fusion Center. But one thing I would say, that before that, we'd already done on the action before that, on a previous occasion, we went door knocking. I mean, we're old style organizers. We went door knocking in the neighborhood. We went door knocking into that, just letting all the neighbors know as to what was going on. There's a spy center. So we also invited the neighbors in the city of Norwalk to come out and join us. And real quickly, before I move on to something else, just want to share something, one more thing with you all as well, that this was the moment where, while folks were outside, we had Jim Lafferty, who was with the National Lawyers Guild, and also some other folks, and then Bilal Ali, our old comrade, was with them too, to deliver a public records request. So this is now, they're at the Fusion Center inside the building.
Why don't you close the door and cover it off? I'm just trying to hand a document so you documents for you. Is there no one in this room who will accept a document? That's all we're trying to do, and then we're out of here. Maybe you can accept a document. Can you accept a document for service of a document, a Public Record Act request? It's a pretty simple, straightforward matter. State law provides for it. We're not above state law.
Sir, I need to close this door.
I need to keep it open until I hand this document to the person who said it was coming, so that I can hand the document to you.
I don't know which person you want to speak to, sir.
I'll speak to anybody. I'm not particular. You're the one who's making this very difficult. I would just like to have somebody come here so that I can hand this document to the person and leave. And for reasons that are totally amazing to me.
Amazing to me too.
You're first of all, it's a government office. You're claiming it's a private office.
When the seal is right there.
When the seal is right there. You won't tell me your name. I guess you're ashamed of what you do. I had no idea. I've given you my card. I'm very above board with what I'm trying to do. You're acting like some kind of spy in a totalitarian government.
Okay. Put orders to close the doors.
By whom?
By whom? By whom?
Don't put your hand
Who
up.
have you been over?
Hey, you fucking Nazi, open the fucking door. What's the matter with you?
Don't, sir. Interfere with the door.
Here, you're served. You're served, you fucking asshole. You're served, you're served, you're served.
So, so that was Jim Lafferty, and Jim, I mean, just he's amazing. Just he's an old school, old National Lawyers Guild, went through the House Un-American Committee, and went through that, and was a prime target. And basically grew up organizing in Detroit with the original members of some members of Drum as well. So Jim was, and Jim's like, I mean, now he's in his mid 80s or so, and he always laments about what has happened to the legal profession, that nobody has the gall to really challenge this thing, and everybody wants to have a winning case. So that continues with Jim as well. So that's some of the stuff, and Fusion Center remains central in our organizing as where we go. So. There's a question here, just out of curiosity: what is the reception of the community to door knocking? Well, the reception of the community was very interesting, because we asked folks to basically come out of their homes, and I think so. We split up in teams. It was maybe Chella and myself, and maybe Nadia and Jamie when we went door knocking, or someone else with Jamie. and
Was
people.
Chella with me?
Ochella was with you? Okay.
Mhm.
So it was maybe Nadia and myself. And as people were coming out of the homes, now this is like late 2012, right? And so we are wearing our Stop LAPD Spying t-shirts. This is the city of Norwalk. This is a suburb in East Los Angeles County. And when we tell them that we wanted to invite you to join us in exposing a spy center. So they were like, huh? What do you mean a spy center? We're like, well, there is a spy center. So if you want to step out, we showed them the building. And what happens is that these fusion centers are always co-located with these county buildings, right? It's a state building. So it was co-located in in the Los Angeles County administrative offices, and on and on and on. But now I'm just going to ask Brendan to join us, and just Brendan, if you want to introduce yourself and just take it, just roll with it, and just talk to us about where we are with fusion centers. What is the intelligence gathering that is happening, and why we should be concerned, and what actions should we be taking?
Well, thank you, Hamid, for the kind introduction and for inviting me to speak with you tonight. So I'm going to talk a little bit about about some of the research I'm doing and what is the what I think are the most important issues on with fusion centers. So let me get this PowerPoint straightened away, and then I can focus with no distractions. There we go. So this picture that you see right here, this is a picture of the inside of one of the fusion centers that Hamid mentioned. This is the emergency operations room in New Jersey's fusion center, which is one of the research sites that I got access to. So here in this particular room, personnel from local, state, federal agencies will join private sector representatives to come together to manage major events like the response to Hurricane Sandy or the security procedures that accompanied the Super Bowl. But fusion centers are more than watch centers. They provide case support for law enforcement. So they're kind of like a Google for cops. Most importantly, however, they're analytic centers that pool resources, blur missions and lines of authority, and provide space to expand a local investigation or individual case into a large multi-jurisdictional operation, right? And what should be especially troubling right now with everything going on with the sending federal law enforcement into cities, there are also places, when I said blur missions and lines of authority, they're a place where state, federal, local, private security entities come together and work together in ways that aren't always clear, right? So there, if we're looking for a starting point for, political policing or a center of gravity of political policing, fusion centers are kind of a a blank spot on the map where shenanigans are likely taking place. Um, fusion centers are also well known because the work, much of the work done there represents a technical advance in intelligence tradecraft. Analysts at fusion centers create new types of intelligence products, social network analyses, various forms of mapping, visualizations of telephony metadata. All of these are refined out of massive data sets. So the intelligence products are can't be produced without bringing together huge databases and using powerful computers and specialized software. So at fusion centers, we'll see some of the same analytic methods that the NSA uses in the hands of state and local police. So this is the common practice. This common strategy is the practice of intelligence fusion, right? The creation of massive data sets and the use of novel analytic tools to refine the data into useful information. So I've been studying fusion centers for 10 years. And I can tell you that we don't know how many interagency police intelligence hubs there exist in the United States. We know that as of 2013, there are 268 federally funded police intelligence centers, The then 72 fusion centers recognized by DHS, there are now 80. The 32 investigative support centers set up under the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Program. The 6 multi-state regional intelligence sharing centers administered by the Bureau of Justice Statistics. The 56 field intelligence groups and 103 joint terrorism task forces chaired by the FBI. This count only includes federally funded initiatives, which leaves out, for example, the police intelligence centers funded exclusively by state governments. There's 13 of these in New York State alone. It also leaves out an untold number of municipal real-time crime centers operated by some cities, and a whole series of security centers, of security intelligence centers run by the private sector. So because official secrecy cloaks their operations, these intelligence centers are difficult to evaluate. The secondary literature reveals many competing and seemingly contradictory claims. The Senate and other government watchdogs find fusion centers to be ineffective at counterterrorism. Civil libertarians consider their routine operations to be rights violations. Activists and some journalists see the deliberate suppression of dissent in fusion centers and related policing practices. Practitioners in law enforcement, in a later report from the House of Representatives, position fusion centers as the centerpiece of a new period of law enforcement, the Homeland Security era, where intelligence analysis is said to be the starting point for a smarter policing that can manage, diverse risks and preempt threats. And then scholars associated with the disciplinary project of surveillance studies theorize fusion centers as unaccountable and opaque institutions of an advanced surveillance society. So after over a year of fieldwork and 82 semi-structured interviews with administrators, police officers, intelligence analysts, district attorneys, and others that work in domestic intelligence in New York and New Jersey, I found that fusion centers do provide a, quote unquote, valuable service, but not in counterterrorism. So terrorism is, the political violence that we profane as terrorism is an exceedingly remote occurrence. There isn't enough, political violence to justify the resources invested in fusion centers. So their mission quickly expanded to this nebulous all crimes, all threats, all hazards mission. This creeping mission, coupled with jurisdictional rivalries, produces a great deal of professional conflicts. So fusion centers are very conflictive places. Everyone doesn't get along there. Fusion centers have not created a seamless information sharing environment, but a very conflictive and uneven one. This apparent dysfunction, however, masks the practical operation of fusion centers as a new layer of institutional structure within the US state. So while proponents of fusion centers hype the threat of terrorism and critics fret about civil liberties, a wider transformation is being ignored. So in terms of the criminal legal system, intelligence fusion extends penal surveillance outside of the prison and ensnares whole communities. This is part of a larger strategic shift in statecraft from mass incarceration to mass supervision. And here I'll note, in the last decade, the state and federal prison population, the number of people, caged in state federal prisons has dropped some 9%. So this matter, however, is not something limited to the criminal legal system. Fusion centers join a series of other actuarial mechanisms, the so-called big data revolution, that give rise to a new pattern of administration for a nascent post-neoliberal world defined by low growth, sharpening class conflict, and escalating global instabilities. So my argument is that fusion centers are part of a larger change in the way complex organizations are administered and populations are governed. So specifically, fusion centers help security agencies offset the costs of austerity and state retrenchment. They act as outsourced intelligence divisions. Many police executives describe them as force multipliers. Fusion centers also complement a doctrinal shift within law enforcement away from community policing and towards intelligence-led policing, which is described by its chief proponent as a business model and managerial philosophy. So under this paradigm, police executives use intelligence analysis to schedule patrols, monitor crime, evaluate personnel, and otherwise manage their departments. Of course, this is all part of this shift towards statistical forms of legibility, this big data revolution. So this reality was quickly apparent to me during my first visit to the Fusion Center. One of my first interviews was with a New Jersey State Police trooper who managed their Fusion Center's computer systems while also overseeing the intelligence analysts working on violent crime. During our interview, he showed me these large social network analyses of drug networks, sprawling link charts that mapped out to a web of relations, lines of authority, and a distribution network extending out to the kinship and friendship relationships, property of the individuals in the chart. He was going back and forth between two charts, one that concerned a Camden-based network and another in nearby Bridgeton, while explaining how analysts made these charts and what value these intelligence products provided for investigators. He got them mixed up. I think that's the Camden one, I said. Oh yeah, you're right. It doesn't really matter though. Look at them. They're all the same element. So I looked at the black and brown faces on the charts, and then I looked back to him. I must have given an expression of shock or dismay because he immediately started backpedaling. He laughed awkwardly. After 17 years on the job, you see a lot and you get cynical. It all starts to look the same. A lot of cities here have serious problems, and Camden is the worst. So the trooper and his team of analysts had recently finished work on Operation Padlock. After 9 months of investigative and analytic work, the New Jersey Fusion Center provided the Camden Police Department, the New Jersey State Police, the Camden County Prosecutor with the intelligence necessary to launch a series of police operations targeting Camden's prodigious drug economy. In 7 weeks, in August and September of 2012, a multi-agency group undertook 93 targeted operations, arrested 535 people for offenses including drug possessions, weapon possessions, and active warrants. The operation also led to the confiscation of over 35 grand in cash and drugs, with a street value of some 44 grand. So this early interview with the detective sergeant offered a glimpse into a different reality that was not acknowledged in the various conversations on fusion centers. Right? It recast privacy as a pedantic concern, as an abstract formalism. I wanted to understand how a massive investment in the name of security and counterterrorism produced a system of ubiquitous surveillance and aggressive policing that managed, the problems of urban decay, poverty, and violence that places like Camden had come to exemplify. So making sense of this situation required a broader perspective that could hold policing, poverty, and political authority within one frame of vision. So for this reason, I conceptualize intelligence fusion and related policing practices as an example of what Mark Neoclaus, George Rogakos, and other scholars call pacification, or the systemic fabrication of capitalist forms of order. So this perspective begins with the basic fact that capitalism is an order of social insecurity that gives rise to a politics of security. In other words, security is the political work of organizing and maintaining social reality based on individualism, market relations, and the commodity form in the face of the insecurities produced by capital accumulation. It is, crudely, the way the routine work of policing maintains particular social property relations, even in the context of the most absurd inequalities. So in Camden, for example, 15% of all buildings, some 3,500 structures, are vacant. Meanwhile, there are nearly 600 homeless people in the city. The plainly obvious solution, providing surplus housing to homeless people, is politically impossible, unimaginable even. Instead, our self-evident norm is to use the most basic power of the state, bodies of armed men, to prevent unofficial access to private property. So these perverse arrangements can only be naturalized as common sense because, as Rogakos contends, security is hegemony, whereas Marx wrote in 1844, security is the highest social concept of civil society, the concept of police, expressing the fact that the whole of society exists in order to guarantee each of its members the preservation of his property, his rights, his person. So indeed, the term police first appeared in the long 16th century when European feudalism gave way to a capitalist world economy formed from the colonial relationships that came to tie Europe, West Africa, and the Americas together. So at this time, police was part of an elite discussion concerning how the rising states of Europe could promote commerce and encourage people to work for a wage instead of living a life of communal subsistence. So at this time, any representative of government had police power. In feudal England, the bailiff or sheriff was empowered to oversee peasant labor and enforce debt repayment, which began the association between, policing and the protection of property. Policing was the term used more generally to talk about administering government until the first half of the 19th century, when the first police departments were formed in cities in Europe and the United States, and the meaning of police began to take its modern meaning as of law enforcement. Even then, police work included civil administration, public health, and urban planning. In its first 50 years, the responsibilities of the NYPD, for example, included everything from street sweeping and boiler inspection to sheltering the homeless and finding lost children. Today, the functions of civil government are spread out among various agencies, but the implementation of social policy still retains some of the power and biases of what we call policing today. So by this, I mean the abiding concerns of all state agencies are the very ones, initially overseen by police: the protection of private property, the creation of markets, the regulation of poverty, the separation of the worthy and deserving poor from an undeserving and inscrutable criminal element. So this is why so many people's experiences with, say, public education or social welfare agencies can be, or usually are, so oppressive, right? Your teacher is a cop, your social worker is a cop, and they've always been one. So I say all this because I think we can find greater clarity by approaching the issues of so-called security by getting at the root of the matter. The security valued in our present social order is the security of capital, right? And both our institutions and our epistemologies, our ways of knowing and our bodies of knowledge reflect this strategic orientation. So instead of denouncing the militarization of policing or even the domestic use of counterinsurgency, we should instead understand that the security apparatus of the modern state operates along a military police social policy continuum, where the strategic orientation of policy, of state intervention, is always bending towards capital and commerce. So the extent of a state intervention is an empirical question to be asked of each historical instance that we consider, right? What is the nature of pacification, brutal military oppression, the routine indignities of normal policing, the lighter touch of social services and their often ignored surveillance, the sophisticated blend of all of these elements in a so-called counterinsurgency or community policing project? These things vary, right? But the strategic orientation of police power, of the military police social policy continuum is always, always oriented towards the fabrication of social order, right? This is a basic structure of capitalist societies. So my book is an attempt to both theorize the role of pacification in policing in the continual remaking of capitalist societies and provide an account of the rapid expansion of police intelligence systems in the US in the last 2 decades. So to make all of this more concrete and specific, let me close with just one example, right? There's a lot we could talk about, more on Camden, New Jersey, which Obama back in 2015 and the entire liberal establishment today holds up as the go-to example for police reform. We could talk about the policing of Occupy, Standing Rock, or BLM, or, some other moments of political policing, some of the more explosive findings from the recent hacks of fusion centers known by the name Blue Leaks. But instead, I want to talk about something much more mundane, right? A little known program from Albany County, New York, way back in 2010. I'm closing with this example because I want to underscore the fact that the current reformation of the security apparatus that's unfolding around us, the rise of what some call mass supervision, is not a direct and simple response to our current political crisis, right? This isn't about Trump and recent events. Rather, it's a more deeply rooted structural transformation that's been, unfolding for at least 2 decades, right? So let's talk about this program in Albany. In 2010, the Albany Police Department launched a pilot program called Operation Reclamation. So these efforts centered on the identification of code red properties. Intelligence analysts mapped crime data and identified a 77-block area that accounted for more than half of the crime in Albany County. Analysts then used the department's record management system to create premise histories for the 165 properties in the area. They scored each property based on calls for service and identified 11 code red properties. The APD, the Albany Police Department, and the district attorney then created a code red team, a multi-agency response team to execute search warrants on drug houses. Before the execution of a warrant, an intel analyst would generate a report on the property that will include, quote, information pertaining to each agency so that the agency may respond with appropriate remedies, disrupting drug businesses on multiple levels by utilizing such things as inspections or home visits from Child Protection Services. By the end of 2010, the 11 houses were no longer designated code red. The success of the initial pilot program convinced Albany County to expand the use of code red assessments. In the near future, they wrote, we hope that all counties within the county of Albany will be scored in such a manner. This operation, however, was just one piece of a larger program, what was called the Safe Homes, Safe Streets. This partners community leaders, landlords, tenants, homeowners, and law enforcement in a series of programs that effectively deputize landlords and tenants as agents of administrative surveillance, extending the gaze of the state into the private sphere of the household. So as part of this larger initiative, New York State funds a dedicated assistant district attorney, or ADA, who trains property owners to screen tenants in order to identify criminal behaviors. The ADA also provides examples of zero tolerance leases with clauses for criminal behavior and encourages landlords to rely on the district attorney's office for support in evicting problem tenants. A sample zero tolerance lease permits the landlord to evict a tenant for any number of reasons, including any criminal, violent, or drug-related activity on or off the lease premises. 2, the use of a controlled substance or abuse of alcohol. And 3, the display, use, or possession of any firearm or offensive weapon. So this program not only encourages landlords to evict tenants, it penalizes them if they do not. In cases where the landlord fails to act in a timely manner, the DA will step in and execute the eviction. When the DA's office takes this step, it'll name the landlord as a respondent to action, subjecting the landlord to fines of up to $5,000 plus legal fees. So the Safe Homes, Safe Streets ADA also organizes what they call the Trespass Affidavit Program. The ADA recruits landlords to provide lists of all tenants and post a no trespassing sign that encourages tenants to report trespassers. Participating landlords also grant the ADA full permission and authority to enter properties at any and all hours of the day for the purpose of arresting persons found who are not tenants, their family members, or invited guests. The Trespass Affidavit Program also allows police agencies to search abandoned properties for illegally stashed weapons and drugs. It has been shown through numerous investigations that local gangs and drug dealers utilize these abandoned properties to hide so-called community guns and as safe houses to distribute illegal narcotics. So through these combined efforts, the Safe Home Safe Streets program has systematically attacked the clandestine market in drugs. The scope of the program is impressive. Within 5 years of the program, from 2009 to 2014, the Albany County's partnership shut down 19 drug houses, executed 100 evictions, trained 770 landlords, and registered over 1,000 properties. So these efforts remove the incentive for landlords to look the other way and collect rents from tenants that sustain themselves through criminalized drug economies. Through the threat of fines, the program compels landlords to actively support law enforcement. In this way, the Trespass Affidavit Program enlists residents in the work of administrative surveillance. It accomplishes this task by closely coordinating the operations of once separate law enforcement agencies, police, prosecution, and community supervision, in a multi-pronged attack on a perceived source of urban disorder, a complex of blighted properties, negligent landlords, disreputable tenants, and criminalized goods. So the Safe Home, Safe Streets program is just one of the more dramatic examples of the new data and intelligence-driven practices being put in place across the country. I wanted to highlight this because, it shows the way that, a simple, data-driven policing program can quickly spiral out into, a very ambitious program with far-reaching consequences. So this, safe home, safe streets is not simply about law enforcement. This is a comprehensive administrative mechanism geared towards managing the state and governing the population. While these programs are centered in the state security apparatus, they spill over into the soft social policing of social policy, right? So note, Child Protective Services was involved. The school system was involved, right? They also ensnare this private sector. Not only the landlords in this example, but corporate actors in other instances we could talk about. These programs often include so-called community policing programs to enlist civilians in the work of security, right? In the work of fabricating bourgeois order. And as we see here, there's coercion involved, right? If you want to keep your apartment, play ball with the cops, right? These programs are also changing the institutional dynamics of the state. The expanding intelligence capacities of federal agencies flatten administrative hierarchies and integrate law enforcement agencies to offset fiscal pressures and staff reductions, while simultaneously tackling the challenges of order maintenance in an era of decarceration and sharpening inequality. So in this context, the expanded intelligence capacities of law enforcement extend the reach of the carceral state outside of the walls of the prison, supplementing mass incarceration with intensified surveillance and new forms of data analysis that feed into a series of targeted police operations. So there are some indications that this emergent order of mass supervision will continue to solidify around us, right? The Trump administration's law and order politics haven't put a brake on the drop in state and federal prison populations. What's more, the pandemic has made the epidemiological risks of incarceration plain, increasing the pace of decarceration and the adoption of electronic monitoring or e-carceration. The pandemic is also opening new possibilities for surveillance schemes in the name of public health, contact tracing, and potentially a system of immunity passports. Add in an unfolding depression and the austerity that is already straining fiscal budgets, and there's no going back, right? These developments will likely further accelerate the end of mass incarceration and hasten the recalibration of the administrative violence of state power around a new logic, right? Surveillance and police intensive form of pacification that I think is best called mass supervision, right? But of course, the success of any pacification program involves conscious political choices, right? On the one hand, the choice of the ruling class to develop strategies to disaggregate working classes and prevent the emergence of a political challenge. And on the other hand, the efforts of subaltern classes to build something autonomous, something that can challenge the present order of things. So, with that said, just thank you for this opportunity to talk to you all. And I'm very interested to see, where our discussion will take us.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you very much. I mean, as you were talking about it, there were so many. Just this morning, there was a police commission meeting, and we were talking about the community safety partnership and how community policing and how there have been this whole mass supervision of public housing and the projects, and from Jordan Downs to Nickerson Garden to Ramona Garden, and how vast this apparatus is and where it's moving. And of course, just even folks in this. On the screen as well have been working with us and mapping out the stalker state and the role of public sector and Department of Children and Family Services and how these things get weaponized. So with that, I'm going to invite Jamie as well, if Jamie has any questions or anything to add to that. But before I go there was a question here that your background and description of fusion centers is great. Thank you, Brandon. I'm curious, are you aware of the multi-agency coordination system as different than the incident command system within the National Response Framework? Or does your training include ICS 700?
I'm not exactly, I can't answer that question. I'm not, don't follow you there, so I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, maybe we could follow up. Let me just hold on to that, Stephen. So we'll get back to it, but hold that thought. So Jamie, do you want to just talk about some of the local stuff as it relates to it?
Yeah, so I think one thing that is really important about what Brendan highlighted in the presentation, and thank you for doing that, is the fact that this has been, when we think about data-driven policing, and a lot of folks here on this call too are part of the uh, data-driven policing working group that the coalition has, and we're particularly now looking at data-informed community-focused policing, which is how LAPD now is framing its programs, right? Predictive policing was one way that law enforcement was framing data-driven policing, but now because predictive policing is so controversial, now they're just switching to talking about data, and because of the veneer of science, right? But I think that it is something that law enforcement has been transitioning to for quite some time, building the infrastructure it needs to be able to do that, and developing a culture in which information sharing and the capacity to do it and the efficiency and effectiveness of doing it is still being refined, but that's the goal. And I think that's something that even if we don't see it being executed perfectly right now, that's the intent. And that was what we saw with Operation Laser, which was a similar program we were speaking about Albany, where they developed, using just standard ArcGIS, hotspots within the community that were based on gun and gang crimes. And within these hotspots, they would basically find a concentrated area of gang or gun violence and create laser zones. And within the laser zones, they would find things that were called anchor points. And anchor points were, through our research, because they could never produce a document that showed us how they established what an anchor point was and what the policy and procedure was. They effectively used various crimes, right? And they just kind of did some calculations and said, oh, there's 1% of all crimes in the area are attributed to this particular spot. And these were like micro hotspots. What is interesting about this in our research in the coalition is that they basically, what we're finding is there's like kind of departmental task force that's happening, but also the FBI involved in monitoring these anchor points and providing data to the neighborhood prosecutor, in which the neighborhood prosecutor would turn over this data to the city attorney and have the city invoke the citywide nuisance abatement program to effectively evict, produce an abatement on the property, or change, using crime prevention through environmental design, change the environment of the space. And we just recently, through one of our public records requests, produced documents where now we are seeing how this city attorney is actually taking tours of the Joint Regional Intelligence Center, which is one of the largest fusion centers in the nation, that's located here in LA County in Norwalk. And so the whole basic city attorney's office is like scheduling a tour. And so this kind of programming is obvious that it's not just a type of programming that is magically happening per area, but it's something that they are strategically starting to use everywhere. So what's also happening, and what is interesting, when we confronted the chief of police, but particularly we wanted to confront the data-driven working group of the police commission, was we wanted to demonstrate how fusion centers and the idea and the concept of fusion centers, where they're data analytics centers, where they gather massive amounts of data, they have their own kind of agents within the center, and these people do an analysis of whatever terrain they are targeting, and then they send their agents out on missions. That concept is actually being replicated within cities now. So now we have what are called community safety operations centers per bureau within Los Angeles City. So there are 4 community safety operations centers, and then per area, which there are 21 areas within LA City, they have area crime community intelligence centers now. And when we confronted the chief of police saying you're basically conceptually creating mini fusion centers within the city, he refuted the idea, saying they're completely different different funding sources. They're not the same thing, they're completely different. But when you look at programmatically what they're doing and what they're tasked with doing, it's exactly the same thing that a fusion center does. So I think the point is that we are we have moved into a space where there is so much data. Data is capital. Data is being collected in so many places, and police agencies are figuring out how to use, not only collect their own, and how to make what was previously analog in their surveillance style and in their collecting of information from the community, make that digital, but they're learning how to operationalize all the other forms of data they're getting in order to further map. And so what we're also have been realizing too in this is that this is the kind of, when we think about policing and gentrification, this is essentially how, when we speak about the policing of the land and policing and control of communities, how you were speaking about it, Brendan, this is essentially how it's happening. And I think the most interesting part about it is that when we are doing an analysis right now of the laser zones and predpol hotspots, is that there's an indices that the city uses on displacement. And Steve was actually on the call with us as well right now, doing a kind of an analysis on this indices, but looks at the displacement that happens in these areas. And one particular area and the corridor through Crenshaw, which is a predominantly Black community in South Central, that is rapidly gentrifying, was targeted as a laser zone for about 4 or 5 years. So when we think about Breonna Taylor, the no-knock warrants, the fact that now the correlation is being made, and how police are essentially protecting capital, they're essentially protecting real estate, and now we are actually, articulating how that is actually effectively happening, and the mapping is very, very key to that. So yeah, really appreciate that.
Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, the similarities, Brandon, just are just it's all over the place. It's pretty much it's running rampant. One question was that if and maybe I'll read the question and then I'll bring up this U.S. Senate report that Brandon, you're probably pretty familiar with as well. That if legislators and officials find them ineffective and wasteful, why do they keep it around? Is it the veneer of objectivity which is helpful during a crisis of legitimacy? So hold that question because I want you to address that, Brendan, but let me just show folks what exactly that not only do the legislators find it wasteful, but let's see what they even say. So this is a 2012 audit of intelligence gathering, and this was basically from U.S. Senate subcommittee for the funding of Fusion Center. And, and this was done by Carl Levin and Tom Coburn's subcommittee, that one doesn't even have to go through the details. All you got to do is look at the table of contents, and it tells the whole story. Looking at it like, that reporting from Fusion Center was often flawed, unrelated to terrorism, had nothing of value, was often outdated, duplicative, and uninformative. They repeatedly violated guidelines, there's no sanctions, just on and on and on. And if you go through there, you will just see that, and this is posted on our website as well, that there is no requirements to not ensure states spend Fusion Center funds effectively, have been unable to meaningfully. Now here's the deal, what Brendan was also lifting as well, that Fusion Centers have been unable to meaningfully contribute to federal counterterrorism effort, which they were originally supposed to be set up. So talk about that a little bit, Brendan, that, what exactly is then just as we talked about mass supervision and domestic policing, that besides that or beyond that, what is the issue here, among other things?
Well, I think there's a couple different aspects going on. I mean, first there's when we just need to think about the political context in which fusion centers emerged, right? So it was obviously part of this 9/11 security surge and part of this moral panic about terrorism. So for a long time, fusion centers not only flew under the radar, but they were, considered a necessary part of, a necessary response to this, this terrible problem of terrorism. So, I just say this, it's kind of a banal point, but, for a long time, fusion centers didn't have much public scrutiny, right? And then you think of, the anytime, what is the answer what is the establishment answer to a poorly functioning police department? It's reform it. So what does that effectively mean? It means, hire more cops, give them more training, give them more technology. So the answer to a dysfunctional fusion center, often, didn't mean shut down the fusion centers. It meant improve them. But, you know, that's just kind of the surface effects of, or the surface chatter, the immediate noise of day-to-day politics. I think there's a deeper reality with fusion centers that makes them, that makes them important, right? So if you focus on counterterrorism, you're missing the point, right? It was, it might have been the moral panic after 9/11 that, made this rapid expansion possible, but that's never what the work was about. So, the I I go back, and what I think we should call the first fusion center is, the El Paso Intelligence Center, set up by the DEA in 1973 for counter drug operations, right? So starting in the 70s, you had the creation of these, interagency police intelligence centers, right? So the beginning of fusion centers isn't 9/11. The beginning of fusion centers is the same mass incarceration story. It's, let's respond to the challenges of the social movements of the long 1960s. Let's respond to the economic transition from an industrial to a post-industrial service economy. Let's respond to both of these things with security, with governing through crime, with managing social problems through the cops and the courts, right? Or managing political contention with cops and the courts. So when we think of all this problematic and useless counterterrorism reporting, right? And there's examples I give in my book, and you can download Blue Leaks and look at the drivel yourself, right? You might say this is garbage. These intelligence products are clearly unintelligent. They're hyping up, they're inflating threats. They're hyping up, just minor issues, right? What I think the point about, all these intelligence products is to build, among the people that operate the state of apparatus, among your municipal cops, among social workers and CEOs and people working in and around the legal system, to just pound into their heads that they should be intelligence reporters, right? That they should be on the lookout for threats and reporting information to the fusion center, right? So the point is, these programs become self-fulfilling prophecies, right? We all know that police stats, we call them crime stats, but they're really not crime stats. They're arrest stats. They're measures of police activity, right? If you look at a victimization survey, you get a very different sense of public safety issues. To use very normative terms, you get a very different sense of public safety issues than if you look at crime stats. So I say all this because counterterrorism was the legitimation for fusion centers. It was the thing that allowed their rapid expansion, but it never was their real mission, simply because there isn't enough terrorism. Political violence is exceedingly remote. Their real mission has always been, the management of poverty. It's been the same mission as the mission of police and the mission of, prisons. So if we ask ourselves why fusion centers, why now, right? I think there's a couple of things. I think one, it's a matter of political economy, right? We all have some awareness, I'm sure, of how our personal identifying information is, monetized and is, you know, information societies are surveillance societies, right? So this has been something that's been developing in tandem with the so-called information economy and information society, right? It's also, I think, a sign of this post neoliberal capitalism, right? Where more and more people are being expelled from the formal economy, right? There's massive populations that are no longer valued, as consumers or as labor, and are too costly to incarcerate, right? So, I open and close my book with the example of Camden, New Jersey, because this is a city that was left out of the transition from an industrial economy to a post-industrial service economy and has become essentially an open air prison, right? So that's the target of intelligence fusion. It's the same people warehoused in prisons, it's refugees, it's houseless people, it'll soon be climate refugees, right? That's what, to me, why intelligence fusion works, right? Or why it hasn't been rolled back. That said, I will say the politics have changed, right? I don't think, we're no longer living in the long hangover of the post 9/11 moral panic. And, I think now is a time to fight. And now is a time where we already see post George Floyd, rapid movement on facial recognition, and we can debate the issue, you can debate the complexities of that campaign. But I just cite it to say that, now I think fusion centers are on the table in a way they've never been before, right?
No, thank you, most definitely. Nick, do you have any comments? But before we I go to Nick, Brendan, I mean, I think it's also maybe in this moment too, we see all these agencies, Customs and Border Patrol in Oregon and various other federal agencies now as a part of just policing the streets of different cities. And of course, information sharing and fusion centers remain very central. So as folks and a lot of folks on the screen as well have been are out on the streets, are protesting, are organizing. What are some of the and just very briefly, what are some of the key things that people should be aware as to, like, in this sort of intelligence gathering and just as a way of people organizing should be thinking of?
Well, I mean, I think I mean things are well, it's hard to wrap our heads around what's happening right now as we approach this, what feels like a climax, like what's going to happen with the election, will Trump leave power, et cetera, et cetera. Is he trying to you know either unleash or get ready to unleash a new COINTELPRO, a really aggressive targeted attack on movements, that's unlike what we've seen before. I mean, for a long time, I was the guy arguing, all throughout the George W. Bush years. I used to run in anarchist circles, and I used to give this talk called Intelligence and Security Culture. And my point was that, security culture, what we know as security culture in movement spaces, can be very useful, but it should be used sparingly, right? So, and it should be used sparingly for two reasons. First, and this was particularly, common in, youth, white anarchist spaces in the early aughts, like security culture becomes, part of the tyranny of structurelessness. It becomes a way for seemingly anti-authoritarian groups to assert, new forms of hierarchy, right? Then it also can become, there's a strategic part of it that should be acknowledged, right? If you're a group, if you're a serious militant social movement organization and you have good reason to believe that you're being monitored, right? You want a certain amount of routine communication that is happening, right? So, I would say, right, there's no need to, only use security culture when you're planning, when you're planning an action that entails risk. Like your normal planning, like let the feds monitor your
Yeah.
routine chatter because I don't think there's a lot of harm in it. A lot of what we do is public. A lot of what we organize is, done publicly. Um, that should be over. Let the feds, monitor it on social media for situational awareness. And then you go to your hardcore security culture, security practices when you're, getting ready to do a serious direct action. Right. So that's, kind of my general advice.
I think I
But
appreciate that. But go ahead, finish your thought. But go ahead.
I was just going to say that, you know, uh, it's coronavirus, right? And shit is getting real. So I think like right now, I think the most dangerous conversation that need that I don't know if it's happening, but I think the most dangerous conversation that needs to happen right now is about the connection between, mutual aid, self-defense, and building autonomous power in particular
Hmm.
in actual communities, like building political power from the block level up, and not just bullshit campaigning. I mean, I was big on Bernie, but he's not built. He's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about building community power, building political power. So I think right now, there's a need. Uh, I think the threat of fascism is real. Lord knows what will happen. Even if you know Trump doesn't get reelected, even if overt fascism is forestalled a little while longer, there's still a good chance of upsurge in vigilante right-wing violence, and I think we should be serious about that, and people should prepare for it. I don't think it's an accident that the certain elements of the left you know are talking about self-defense. I think that's a serious and needed conversation right now. And I wouldn't have said that in you know 2005. I would have thought that was absurd ultra left posturing. So.
No, but thank you. It's real. It's real. So, well, the last few minutes as we transition into the archiving piece, Nick, do you have a comment or anything to share? You don't have to if you don't want to, but go ahead.
Um, yeah, I mean, I was just wondering, since you were talking about pacification, Brendan, like the war on drugs, war on crime, war on terror, etc. These are all pacification campaigns, wars of accumulation. Um, so within the context of the war on drugs, how do fusion centers like bring the informal drug economy into global circuits of capital? Is this just like a cash grab? I mean, do they make something legible, and are they transferring wealth from one sector to another? I'm just wondering about that, kind of um, the transfer of wealth between, one sector to another. So, yeah.
Well, the thing I will say is like, fusion centers, are institutional locations where other actors kind of corral resources and then like jump off to do something. So when we think of like, big multi-jurisdictional counter drug operations where you get together like municipal police, state police, prosecutors, feds, like those have been going on for a long time. And fusion centers just supercharge that. They provide a place for those different law enforcement agencies and different state agencies to come together, collaborate, and launch a big program. This report on this issue on drug economies, right? I think this is a complex and difficult issue because it's the basic data is not clear. We can look at the asset seizures, asset forfeiture, right? So the cops are bringing in, hundreds of millions of dollars each year nationwide from drug seizures. But, I think, if you read like Al McCoy's work, like or if you've been following the stories with, Mexican drug cartels, right? The huge, the big connections that move massive amounts of drugs from one country to another, right? The big trafficking connections are, are intelligence agencies are mixed up in them, right? They're managing some as sources, they're attacking others, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we should look at asset forfeitures as, as a tax on clandestine and criminalized economy that cannot be suppressed, right? Prohibition doesn't work. Didn't work with alcohol, doesn't work with drugs, doesn't work with sex work, right? These economies aren't, when you criminalize them, they don't go away, they just go underground. So police power like perversely regulates these things, these economies. So you think of like Ruth Wilson Gilmore's famous argument, mass incarceration is about warehousing these, workers who are left out of the economic transition, right? And it brings them back into the system in a way. Well, so does the drug war. The drug war is the drug war is to urban lumpen proletariats or semi-proletariats or whatever you want to call them. The drug war is to that segment of labor what unionization was in the early 20th century. It's a way of reincorporating them into formal institutional life, and it's reincorporating them through criminalization rather than through collective bargaining, right? And then I would say like when we think of the drug economy on the highest level, when we think of the drug economy as a sector of the global economy, I think we get into a very opaque and dangerous domain of power, right? And I'll point out that the UN High Commissioner on Drugs, back in like 2009 said, or maybe it was 2010, said that, the Great Recession would have been worse if banks all of a sudden didn't start, asking less questions and laundering a whole bunch of illegal drug money, right? So they estimate the global drug economy is supposed to be 1% of global GNP, which doesn't sound like a lot, but is absolutely tremendous. So so I don't have a good answer for you, but that's what I'll say.
Well, I mean, the money laundering, obviously, these are very much a part and parcel of that. So, well, thank you, first of all, Brendan. This was awesome, and we welcome to stay with us for the duration because now we're going to talk briefly, and then towards the end we can circle back as well. We're going to talk about a project that we've been working on because for us, these are both knowledge exchange and decolonizing knowledge, but also working meetings as well. This is like, that's what we do as organizing and building that power. And we've been on this project where we are developing a separate website, archiving website, where all the documentation that we have from public records to everything else is going to be just housed and be made publicly accessible. So, that anybody can go in, whether you want to do research, whether you want to access any documents, it's going to be made available. So I'm going to pass it on to Dylan and Jamie to walk us through as to what the heck is going on with that. Go ahead, Dylan. You need to unmute.
Hey everyone, I'm Dylan. I'm an artist and organizer and grad student. I have been working on the digital archive project with the coalition for the past couple of months. It's an idea that we've been discussing for over a year, that different folks have helped develop in terms of the website. And we finally received funding. We received a grant a couple of months ago, and we started with phase 1 development of the project. So the project itself is currently its form will be that of a digital archive, and it is meant to house both community-oriented documents created by the coalition and also PRA documents, Public Records Act documents that have been received by the coalition through from the City of Los Angeles, and the archive will continuously be updated with the ongoing PRA requests that the coalition is processing. So the archive itself it's making a lot of different interventions within like community-based archiving, within academia, within art, within activism. So I myself am managing kind of the interdisciplinary overlaps, also some of the conceptual development for the form of the archive. And I have a couple of examples just to get a bit visual, just to show y'all our current progress. So, oh, that's one of the PRA documents. So this is the kind of landing page and kind of interface for the digital archive. So this is, the first page. We're currently working on the Before the Bullet Hits the Body collection, and that will be a consolidation of all of the PRA documents, the hundreds of PRA documents that are involved, that were received through the PRA request. We'll also have a kind of timeline to show the community fight against predictive policing from 2013 to 2019. This is just like a filter view, two different views, grid view, list view of the different documents. And this is like the actual description and page for each document as you would see them. So that is now I see something in the chat. Oh, thank you, Annie. Annie said that the project looks really great. So that's the kind of the to give you a visual sense of what that looks like. And the actual content, the part of the timeline that we're working on, that Jamie has been working really hard on, is, for example, this timeline where we go from the coalition fight goes from 2013 to 2020, and we have compiled, or she has compiled, the different documents that are that relate to the community timeline against this against predictive policing. And so that's a more curated section where it ties into how more of like a pedagogical tool of how we can support other folks, other communities and organizers file their own PRA requests. So there will be, so the digital archive, first and foremost, will be a community organizing tool that, and it's different from other community-based archives in that it has efficacy, it has a function, can make change in the present, whereas archives traditionally are meant to kind of preserve history, preserve events of the past, and represent different facets of history, which is also like a great and noble goal. But our digital archive will function a bit differently in terms of our focus of this being an extension of our capacity and an extension of our community organizing tools. So that's like a kind of brief overview of like how we're thinking about the archive, where we're at right now. And we've been thinking about also like the community component to it, because we do want to incorporate, we want to bring community members into the archival process. And so that we're not, only relying on small groups of people who have a certain set of expertise, but we incorporate a learning process like among ourselves within the coalition, and build our skills together. So in thinking about that, and then also in thinking about cataloging the actual archive itself, tagging things with descriptions, names, titles, we started thinking about how violent some of the language is. And I can, so this is, for example, our metadata template. And, we can, some of it is like really simple, right? Like, landmark locations, cities, neighborhoods, English, Spanish, like the title of the document, like that stuff is super simple. But once we start to look through the actual documents and start labeling how they have categorized, how the LAPD has categorized our neighborhoods, our community members, our friends, our families as, chronic offenders, transients, labeling them based on gang member status. Do we use the categories defined, by LAPD? Do we rely on, just labeling the metadata, like the searchable data that's tied to each document? Do we label as metadata only the language produced by the state? And of course, the answer is no, because that's like really harmful to us as community members. But we, but that's the thing, it's like the standardization of vocabulary is, obvious, it's like a super exclusionary process, it's a violent process, and it's still something we have to kind of grapple with in labeling our documents, because that's the language that shows up and that can generate useful searches. Like when if these documents are labeling people as chronic offenders, it would actually be kind of useful for us to search, that term to get the useful documents that we need, right? Or the documents that we feel relevant to us. So we started thinking about, okay, so when a document refers to an unhoused person, do we include the term homeless, or do we not? When a document, mentions an undocumented immigrant, do we name all the document, all of the kind of terms, derogatory or not, so that people can find the documents useful to them? And that's the kind of thing that we're grappling with, and that's what we start wanting to do focus groups on, because we want to generate our own folksonomies, or we want to help facilitate community members in generating their own folk taxonomies, so folksonomies, to rename how we are named in these materials, to kind of create our own language, and but also have it be this kind of inclusive intervention into state documents that are considered really static, and that it's kind of this official document that you can't do anything with, you can't transform. But I think we absolutely can through interventions in metadata, through creating alternative and inclusive folksonomies based on these documents or in response to these documents. So for example, I was looking through the bureaus and the document, I pulled them from this document that was from the CPRA California Records Act, a Public Records Act letter in response to the LASER program. So then from this document you see okay, well, this is how LAPD has cut up Los Angeles, and it's okay, so well, I know the Hollenbeck area, that's Boyle Heights, nobody will be able to search Boyle Heights in our website, or like the people who search Boyle Heights on our website will never be able to, you know, find the documents that they need if everything is just labeled Hollenbeck area, you know. So like it's also a matter of trying to figure out how to make our digital archive the most accessible for our community members, and while also it's like when in our recent discussion, Aldo described it as like multilingual. It's like a translation, how we're translating state language into our own community-oriented language, and how, I mean, especially with geography, but also like how people name themselves. Like, you know, we can't, you know, the 4 or 5 of us can't do it alone. We need input from different facets of the community, different people from different backgrounds, and to really generate an inclusive vocabulary and language for this archive, so that it is useful for the folks who we especially want it to be useful for. So that's where we're at. I feel like Jamie, you can, you know, jump in if you feel like I missed anything that I should have shared. And we were also interested in, I know it's a bit late, but we're also interested in if y'all would like to take a look at, you know, these, there was like a PowerPoint earlier, like the PowerPoint and this one document from the LAPD, and create your own folksonomies you know, within, you know, 20 minutes, no pressure, so that we see what kind of metadata that we can generate among ourselves.
Yeah, I think thank you so much for that, Dylan. And I think what's so amazing about this project is that the fight to dismantle the 2 predictive policing programs, Operation Laser and PredPol, you know, created a moment where we built a lot of community resistance, we built community knowledge, and there was kind of like this swell in a moment where we realized that, you know, we actually took something down. We broke one of their programs, we stopped them from using it, we exposed the program, and like we said, now we're kind of still in the process of figuring out like what was the impact. And so not only did we develop tools in that process where we developed you know, meeting notes where we first started talking about it, slideshows where we first started talking about predictive policing, really showing the organic nature of how the community came together, and just, you know, had a couple articles about predictive policing, started creating language, started kind of figuring out what the next steps was going to be. We you know, came together, we developed documents around focus groups. And so all of these things are outlined in what we call the Before the Bullet Hits the Body collection. And that was, we named it the Before the Bullet Hits the Body collection because that was the name of the report that came out from the predictive policing fight. And so I really appreciate how Dylan laid out that it predominantly is a way for us to be able to exchange information and exchange organizing tactics and exchange how we went about our fight for other people to do the same thing. Because just as we saw with what Brendan was demonstrating, what was happening even in Albany, which was very much reflected here in Los Angeles, these are the kinds of tools that we need to be exchanging and making accessible to each other in order to create fights that are significant and relevant to our own communities wherever we are organizing within. And so, so that's one big piece that I really, really appreciate a lot, because it allows it for us not to just be history, for not something to just have occurred, but something to be relevant and kind of active and present in the present day. I think the second piece really, which Dylan was lifting, which I really appreciated as well, was the aspect and the notion of language. Because language, and this was something what's interesting about the point that Dylan brought up about Hollenbeck division, which is now Hollenbeck area, is that, you know, the mappings that we're talking about, how police come in and they map a terrain and they decide how they're going to govern it. Very early on in the campaign, and I hadn't disclosed it to folks yet, I was told, don't refer to that area as Hollenbeck, refer to it as Boyle Heights, or refer to it as, the community that it is. And so when Dylan had brought that up, I was like, oh, wow, we're revisiting that same conversation, which is a conversation around, how do we actively take power in our own language, who and how we are, how we describe ourselves, how we create our own autonomy in our own spaces, and then juxtapose that with the language the state uses to organize us, right? To figure out and put us in little boxes or data points or whatnot. And so to actually have that juxtaposed on the onto the document so that people can actively be like kind of reclaiming themselves, who they are, while engaging in the archive really is a kind of, again, a current moment where we are creating language and we're retaking back the power that is in a sense, the state is trying to disempower us through these programs. I think a third component of the archive, which I'm really fascinated with, is really how we're going to be able to keep adding documents to it. And that's where we are thinking about also partnering with the, and this is something that we haven't asked them yet, so I'm just saying it's an idea, but with the SoCal Library, where there is an actual physical archive present within our city, and we actually start having more kind of community meetings around what is it to have a living archive, and how do people actually participate in looking through public records requests, learning how to file their own, but then also learning how to preserve their own history, right? Because so much of what we do will not be preserved as community members, as non-officials, that are not kind of established within an institution that may preserve what we're doing and see it as relevant. So how do we start the act of actually preserving our own language and our own documents and the things that we create, as well as sharing and making open access for other people to look at the documents that we have. And a lot of it too is because of manpower. A lot of the coalition's public records requests are producing so many documents that it really is a process of learning for us to go through them with a fine-tooth comb to figure out what we do have. So it's been an amazing experience. I'm really excited to keep it going, because I think the work against law enforcement, the work to dismantle policing is intergenerational. It's something that's going to take a long time to do, and this kind of preserving of our tactics, showing the different kinds of tactics that law enforcement use, is something that we need to be able to pass on and keep alive for generations to see. I wanted to check in too, because I know Ben, you are here. I don't know if Aldo is on as well, if they had anything also that they wanted to just talk about in regards to the process.
Nothing specific. I think you covered it pretty well. We've started on the actual coding of the website too, and that's coming along well. Hoping to finish that up in the next few weeks. One thing I am considering there is a sort of interface for the community, and I think Aldo had wanted to ask also about that and how the community would imagine interfacing with the website. So maybe one extra thing to add.
Aldo, go ahead and unmute if you have a question.
Oh, I didn't have a question.
Oh, or no, a comment or whatever.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Ben. Just highlighting ways that the community would be engaging with the archive in the long term was something that came up in our last conversation, and thinking through various ways that could happen, and possibly happening in a more programmatic way, where it's maybe done through community workshops and things like that.
Cool. So maybe we could, Jamie, Dylan, just see if other folks have any comments or any feedback. Any thoughts, any comments? Because one
So
thing
yeah,
we,
oh, I was going to say, because I'm really interested to see what folks think about this, because we have been approached by other, reporters, journalists, other folks wanting to have access to the public records requests that we do have. And now they're starting to become accessible through an LA County portal where you can like search through the portal for certain things and get documents. But we have to really think about when we present them in this archive, and especially through collections of, community fights, they kind of take on a certain kind of relevancy as well. So the documents kind of we start to use them to shape a story as well. So I'm just curious as to other folks who have maybe worked with archives, or if in general, how people feel like this will be applicable to them, or if something that they'd be interested at all in participating in, helping with, or, even a part of their own research and seeing research or, study, or, if anybody had any comment.
yeah, hold on, just go ahead and unmute yourself, Steve.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
hi, guys. Again, the work you're doing is remarkable. We've talked about this before. Lionel Hernandez, the $1 million hood idea, and the cost of being poor. I think all of this goes hand in hand. The term that she uses in her book, and I think we're doing it right now, is developing rebel archives. You can't count on the state to track this stuff. Where else can you do it? And she uses that term in her book and in her development. I think we're being proactive now in doing it. So all this is going in exactly the right direction. The changing the terminology too. Dylan's point. Those are our words, our community, not theirs. And to use this as a Rosetta Stone, I think, is an excellent tool also. So all good, all very positive. Thank you.
Any other thoughts, any other comments? Because one of the things we do want to reach out is to, when we're going to start getting document dump, we need a whole lot of hands on deck to help us sift through and track through, because just this one public records we have filed on the rebellion policing by LAPD, they have come back and they said we have 675,000 emails. Okay, so they're claiming this whole burden issue about trying to redact them. So that's the range of that. So we will need a whole lot of folks on hand. So anybody wants to already volunteer down the line that we can hit up later? Okay, well, we have one. Zach's happy to Zach S. Andrew, okay, cool. So maybe Victoria, Julia. All right, Jamie, Dylan, so did you know their names?
Should I share the two files that we talked about just so that
Yeah,
we can?
let's just
Okay.
give folks a taste of what we do have.
Yeah, just we got about 10 more minutes.
Okay.
Because I want to just come back to, there's a couple questions for Brendan that I want to close out with.
Okay.
Oh, cool. All right. So here's some documents here as well. So Jamie, that was Andrew, Zach S, Julia, and Victoria.
Can folks do me a favor and just send their emails over, because I don't have everybody's email. I think I have.
If you can send them to Jamie directly, because Jamie is
Yeah,
co-hosting.
I have Victoria. Okay, and that's great. Thank you.
And what are these documents, Dylan, that you just posted in chat?
One is the letter from the LAPD after, or in response to the coalition's PRA request regarding laser, and the other is a PowerPoint on laser that was one of the documents released to the coalition after the PRA request got processed by the LAPD. So if any, I know it's like a super short amount of time, but if any kind of your own, if any language comes up for you, we'd love to see what kind of language, what kind of terms come up that maybe you you glean on in the documents and or are writing in response to what you see in the documents, like a counter, a language that you would create in response to the more the state categorization within the documents.
So feel free to even email us at stoplapdspying@gmail.com with any recommendations and suggestions as well, if things don't pop up right now. I mean, I think and that's been, I really do appreciate the process too, because like everything else, the coalition always wants to be very intentional, because of course, right now, this is what we're doing on Zoom, but we also want to bring all of this information to our folks in Skid Row and other communities as well. How do the youth see this? How do different other community members see that, to making sure that this is accessible and it's not just something kind of hovering in the sky. One comment, Dylan, that they're saying that they don't see the links to these documents.
I put it in the chat.
Oh, gotcha.
And the file download links are in the chat. If y'all can't see it or can't download it, maybe we can email it.
And they went to everyone?
Yeah, it went to everyone.
Okay, cool. Okay. So yeah, no, I saw this now. Okay. All right. Okay. So that's good, Victoria. We can probably email them to you later too, because if you're on your mobile and it's not, so we can definitely get them over. Cool, cool, cool. Any other comments from anybody else? All right. Well, with bated breath, we wait. And so what's our timeline here, Jamie, for this thing to be?
I don't know, Dylan, you keep us on track.
No, I mean, this is the first time we're doing this, so I mean, any within the next week or so. I mean, this is just kind of like a trial run to figure out what we could be expecting once we start doing our different focus groups. So yeah, it's entirely voluntary. Anytime within September, I guess.
Cool. Thank you. No, that's awesome. But that's just the first phase, and then of course the second phase, and by the time it's up and running, maybe you're looking at about 4 to 6 months, right?
I think so.
Okay, cool. Well, good. All right. Well, thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Aldo. So, Brendan, just had a question as we close it out in about another 10 minutes or so. That issues and the fusion centers. I mean, obviously, we actually get a lot of folks approaching us around, just government-sponsored organized stalking, the directed energy weapon testing run. And then also weaponized nano and some other, operations that the government runs. And just at the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, we've had, several community members over time who have approached us about being targeted as a result. So what does your research show as where the fusion centers fall into this scheme of things?
Well, I mean, what I found is, fusion centers, at least in not just DHS fusion centers, police intelligence centers, are actively involved in, the targeting of so-called chronic offenders. So any, many jurisdictions in New York and New Jersey work with different police intelligence centers to come up with a list of, of people viewed as prolific offenders, and then they are, the information is shared with police who will, I had one pretty senior police officer tell me they'll arrest them for anything, including, throwing a banana peel or apple core out of a car and send them to jail for a day, you know? So, those chronic offender programs are well, well established. I mean, the more specific claims of, targeted individuals, I haven't. I haven't seen any, any firsthand evidence of that in my research.
Mhm.
So.
Okay. And then one quick question, I'll come to you, Mike. Then the other question is that what do you see now with the role of fusion centers? And this actually sort of intersects with the work that the coalition is doing as well, that now Palantir, the data processing company, has a full contract with Health and Human Services, their project Protect, for gathering information from contact tracing and all of that. And then, of course, DoD, Department of Defense, has always been very central to that, and Homeland Security is now, and now CDC, the Center for Disease Control, completely out of the mix. How do you see that information being processed and gathered and shared, and the role of fusion centers in that?
Well, I mean, this the it's a cliched phrase in the fusion center literature, but they say if you've seen one fusion center, you've seen one fusion center. So I mean, the this is part of a deliberate strategy to avoid any regulation or accountability. But fusion centers don't have they don't have they operate within these loose frameworks of baseline capabilities that they're supposed to meet.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have these set guidelines. Each fusion center doesn't do it doesn't do the same things, right? And if you go outside of DHS and you start looking at the stuff under HIDA, or different state and municipal programs, things vary even more. So I say all this because I think given the way policy formation works in the United States, like, I think we're less likely to get a centralized national system, and we're more likely to get, like, a patchwork of of different, um, of federal systems, of state systems, of privatized systems. I mean, I do think that I don't think it's obvious that COVID is putting pressure, is easing the spread of surveillance in the name of public health, and you know um, a lot of the traditional critics of surveillance are having a harder time responding. Um, so I say all that because, I think I have a piece coming out actually with Mark Neilklaus on the idea of medical police, and we try to make the case that, you know, whether it's immunity passports, whether it's high tech, automated contact tracing, surveillance in the name of public health is coming, and the way to respond to it is not, you know, let's legalize it, let's regulate it. The way to respond to it is, by try to redefine public health, right, and try to, you know, def, beyond Medicare for all, redefine it in terms of a commons, right? So, and something, a commons that would include a transformation of the way we think about, information ownership, right? So that's a long, convoluted answer. I mean, I think things are moving too fast. I don't have a clear understanding of where things are going. I think given what we know about the way policy formation looks in the US, I think we're going to end up with a more decentralized and patchwork system here for, contact tracing and immunity passports than you might see in the People's Republic of China or in a European country. But that doesn't make it any less dangerous, and I guess just as a final point, I think the way to fight it is not by fighting on their terms. That's the trap of the ACLU, but it's redefining the conversation, and I think that means, making a more basic intervention on the level of health, on the level of, on all levels of social life,
Right.
um,
Most definitely, yeah. Mike, do you have a comment or a question?
Hey, yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Hey, Brendan, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. I'm an immigration attorney in San Francisco, and I guess often enough get cases from people who have been taken into custody after one of these giant sweeps that happens in a given neighborhood in San Francisco. And in immigration law, you're not entitled to discovery. Whatever kind of information you get about the person you represent, you have to get it on your own. And that happens by filing FOIA requests, public records requests with any number of government agencies. So I'm wondering, that first photo or slide that you put up with all the mugshots of all the different people, I think from Camden, who had been arrested. Off your head, do you have recommendations about, public record quest tips for a case? I'm trying to get information on people that have been swept up, and it sounds like these fusion centers are involved in this. And I mean, I'm pretty sure they are, but I feel like there's this wall that I can't penetrate. And I've had this conversation with any number of immigration attorneys here in the Bay Area, and we feel like we're running up against this wall. And I don't know, it's hard to even kind of articulate the question. How do you file a FOIA request about a specific case with a fusion center? How do you even get a response in time to, deal with the case? Just these things just take forever, et cetera. Maybe that's kind of a long question, but the other one that I'm really truly dying to ask you is, can you elaborate on any relationship you see between the Phoenix program from Vietnam and, fusion centers today?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, just on the FOIA question, unfortunately, I can't give you any advice about how to speed up the process, but what I can tell you is a good thing to do is, let's say you want, you have reason to believe that there is an immigration sweep that started with an intel process at a fusion center, and I send identical requests to every agency that is party to that fusion center. So you send a request to the municipal police, to the state police, to ICE, to DHS, Office of Intelligence Analysis, and you know and then I've gotten documents from state agencies that were denied by federal agencies, so they don't necessarily coordinate with each other. And because it's a task force environment, you might get lucky. Another thing you can do, and maybe you're already doing this, I've worked with some people who thought they were were being surveilled by the police. And normally, like if I wrote a FOIA request to the LAPD and I wanted Hamid Khan's documents, they wouldn't give them to me because Hamid's still alive and he has privacy protections. But if I got everyone from if I got Hamid to write me a letter saying I give Brendan McQuaid permission to request my documents, then that gets around that. So with doing that, we were able to prove that the Chicago police were monitoring the social media presence of a number of, pretty prominent activists, a few years ago. So those are the two tricks I could, just share about open records requests. Regarding the Phoenix program, I'm like very excited you answered that. You asked that question because, oddly enough, the Phoenix program was my point of entry into this whole subject. So, I'm 35 years old. I was in high school when, 9/11 happened and the war on terror geared up. I lived in southeastern Connecticut, and my congressman was this guy, Rob Simmons, who was a retired military intelligence and CIA veteran from Vietnam. He, in the early 70s, was the CIA, you know, uh, province officer in Phu Yen province, and he ran he ran an interrogation center and a paramilitary unit, right? He also was the congressional architect of some of the policies that he was one of the congressional architects of fusion centers, is the short of it. Uh, so so that's how I got into the anti-war movement. I got obsessed with this guy Simmons, and then I realized that in during the Vietnam War, as part of the Phoenix program, which is the biggest counterinsurgency program of the war, the CIA created an integrated network of intelligence centers. So they had them on the province level. They were called PIOCs, Province Intelligence Operation Coordination Committees. And then each district, like a county essentially, had a DIOC, a district level intelligence operation coordinating committee. And these were places, they did exactly what fusion centers did. It was lower tech because it was the 60s and 70s, but all the intel came there. They aggregated it, they developed products, they developed hit lists, and then they sent them out to the reaction forces to go hunt for Viet Cong infrastructure. So my original, when I was trying to figure out grad school, my original research project was, I knew that I had this feeling that, fusion centers and homeland security were the domestic application of counterinsurgency, and the Vietnam example was a profound and clear one. That said, there isn't there isn't too much to make the case that there was a deliberate effort to model DHS on Phoenix. There's a quote in Jane Mayer's book, The Dark Side, about how Cheney and one of his aides got very interested in Phoenix. There's a lot of people like my former Congressman Rob Simmons, who are Vietnam vets who were involved in the creation of Homeland Security. What I think, is I think that the resemblance here is like a structural one, right? Like, like this is the point I was trying to make about that police pacification or police military social policy continuum, right? Like, capitalist societies create disorder, they create insecurity, and they require active state intervention to fabricate social order. And in situations of acute conflict, and I think as the United States approaches a whatever as political intention increases in this country, the state enters crisis, the traditional institutions aren't working, so you need to cobble together all these exceptional forms like fusion centers. I think that's the process. I think expertise is being mobilized from all sorts of other, colonial situations and encounters. So you can trace the impacts of Vietnam era counterinsurgency on DHS, but there's also the impacts of the more recent ones, Iraq, Afghanistan, Central American dirty wars. There's a movement of personnel practices and technologies across these boundaries. And I don't think the people involved aren't always aware of it. So I interviewed a lot of former Intel analysts working at fusion centers who had military intelligence experience, and they would talk about the similarities, but they didn't have any deeper historical, they didn't have any arguments or information about how it was explicitly modeled on these previous examples. So that's all a long-winded answer just to say that I think it fusion centers look exactly like the intelligence sharing operations that you see put in place in virtually every counterinsurgency campaign. We can trace connections, people, practices, technologies from one site to the other, but that's because they're all dealing with the kind of same similar problems, right? And that's how capitalist states deal with problems of political contention, right?
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Well, with that, I mean, I think that's mm, yeah, thank you, Brandon. That's kind of that brings us to the end of our conversation. It's 8 o'clock, so much appreciate everyone hanging in there, and appreciate everybody's contribution. So, Brandon, once again, thank you very much, and thanks for your scholarship and thanks for your support. And really appreciate you making yourselves available. Thank you, Dylan, and Jamie, and Ben, and Aldo, and Nick, and everybody else. So this is was our number 26. Our next webinar is going to be next Tuesday. Jamie, do you want to give us a 30-second snapshot of what to expect the fourth Tuesday of the month?
Yeah, so we're going to be talking again about data-driven policing and focusing a little bit on location-based policing this time, looking at maps that are located in downtown, areas that were deemed anchor points, and also looking at how the Pred pole hotspots and the laser anchor points engaged with each other and police the terrain. We'll also be bringing on Steve Diaz from Los Angeles Community Action Network, who'll give us a little bit of history on the types of the city agencies that were trying to move people off of these particular areas that are targeted, not only what was going on in Skid Row prior to the use of Pred pole and laser, but what was also going on in downtown prior to the use of Pred pole and laser, but now how Pred pole and laser is being used to kind of maintain the status quo of the new downtown in LA. So we're looking at it as the new settler colonialism, the policing of land. So join in that conversation. You'll learn more about what the working group is doing and how to get involved and participate in that combo. So thanks.
Thank you. And also would love to, and Brandon, maybe you may want to recommend somebody if you know, because I think we will also want to have a conversation about psychops and psychological warfare and psychological operations too, because that's a huge issue. I mean, that's been used, so often both on a global level and a domestic level as well. So this whole notion of community policing and community safety partnership, all of this becomes a part of psychological warfare for submission and and coercion and everything else. So with that, thank you all very much. This is going to be uploaded on the website in the next couple of days. So once again, stoplapdspying.org. Have a great night. Be safe, be healthy, and we'll see you all next Tuesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Love your work. I've learned so much from your organization. It's really
Thanks,
great
Brandon.
to talk
Appreciate
to you.
it. Bye-bye.
Have a wonderful night.
Mm-hmm.